Hello and welcome to another episode of Bike Fit Q&A with pro bike fitter Lee Prescott. He's a man with the knowledge and happy to share his insights in how to solve your bike fit issues. And recently we asked you to share any issues you might be having right now for him to answer. So we've got some good questions lined up, ranging from numb feet, sore shoulders, a stiff neck, front wheel stability at high speed. But we start with a good question about how to level a saddle correctly. So let's dive in and find out.
So the key with setting up a curved saddle is if you just think about how you're using it, it should give you a good indication of where to set it, okay? What we're trying to do is the pubic rami and the ischial tuberosities are the bit that are going to engage with the saddle, right? So if your pelvis is naturally at that angle, then the bit you're sitting on in the middle needs to match it. So if I'm like this, I can kind of almost bring that up to match, and that would be the right angle for that amount of pelvic rotation. There's a bit of a hard and fast way you can do it, is if you take a level, pop it on the highest part of the saddle at the front, and bring it in about an inch from the back. Normally a good starting point would be making that bit level. Okay, so you can see the little bubble here, and the digital readout is telling me that that is now perfectly level. So for a curved saddle, that would be my starting point, and then adjust from there. I empathise. I also suffer from a congenital back disorder, so I live with back pain as well, and it's horrible. However, a bicycle set up correctly is one of the things that, in theory, should help to alleviate some of your back pain. Now, it sounds like from what you've said in your question, what you're suffering from is kind of normal mechanical back pain, so it's muscle ache rather than structural stuff. I would say if you're getting any tingling in the legs, pins and needles or numbness in the toes, or any issues going to the toilet, please go and seek medical advice for that quickly. But if it is just kind of muscle pain and like a burning sensation in the lower back, and I'm hoping it's to the side of the spine, whether it's bilateral or not, you'll have to let us know. But if that is the case, it's positional, okay? So it sounds like what is happening when you're trying harder, essentially your posterior chain is tugging on these back muscles and fatiguing them. And often if they're pulling too hard on that area and it can't cope with it, that's where the pain's coming from. So I would suggest there's a positional issue going on there. It might be that you're too rotated, so your pelvis is too rotated and that's causing extra pull on the posterior chain, or the saddle might not be in the right position. So again, I would seek out a certified fitter and have that checked. So measuring your bike shouldn't be this difficult, okay? Most of us pros work on a pretty standardized XY coordinate system for setting up positions. And the key thing here is you're measuring a position, not the bike, okay? If you measure a bike from, bottom bracket to top of saddle, that's fine. But if you want to then replicate that onto different bikes, that only works if they've all got exactly the same seat tube angles, which I can guarantee they won't if they're bikes for different disciplines, okay? So if you're wanting to replicate the same position onto multiple bikes, you use the bottom bracket as the datum point, okay? Now this is assuming they all have the same crank length. If they don't, then you're probably going to need to go and see a fitter and have this done for you. But all you need to do is work out how far above and behind the bottom bracket the saddle is, and then how far above and in front of the bottom bracket the bars are, okay? Us fitters have fancy tools to allow us to do this quickly and simply, but we're not expecting you to spend hundreds of pounds buying equipment like this. You can do it simply with a tape measure. So with a little bit of mental arithmetic or a scrap of paper and a pencil, measure how far off the floor your bottom bracket is. Then measure how far off the floor your saddle is. Likewise for the stem. If you then deduct that measurement from the other two, you've got the height above the bottom bracket that those two contact points are. Then you just need to do exactly the same for the fore and aft of both from a wall. So, you know, get your bike propped up against a wall, use the wall as the datum and go to the bottom bracket and then go to the midpoint or the 7cm point on the stem, and likewise to the bar. Deduct one from the other and that gives you your XY coordinates. Okay, you can annotate them very simply by something like this. You know, just do a drawing of your bike and mark down the distances in front and above the bottom bracket that the contact points are. And that's how to do it with just a tape measure. So that being said, the other thing to just bear in mind though is that you won't necessarily want to be in exactly the same position on all of your bikes. If you've got a winter bike, a gravel bike, a mountain bike, that's a different position to a standard road bike position. You know, even if it's all road bikes, one might be your endurance bike, and I don't mean that in terms of what your manufacturer has described it as. I mean it's the bike you do your long distance rides on versus your the bike you do your crit racing on. They will have different positions, so don't necessarily set them up all the same unless you are just using them all for the same purpose. Speed wobble can be caused by a few different things. I think the first thing I would ask you to check is that your tyres are properly seated and also that they're properly manufactured. The easy way to do this is literally pick your bike up and spin it and see if your tyre wobbles or not. If the tyre is wobbling, then it's either not seated correctly, or you know we sometimes see on, especially on some cheaper tyres, that actually the casing is not the same kind of flexibility throughout, so you'll get these natural little wobbles. Check that first. If you're running tubeless, also check that your fluid is still fluid. We have seen in the past, especially when you get to this time of the year, people have been riding their same fluid all summer, they get to the winter, keep going, and without realising that essentially they've now just got a rubber golf ball rolling around inside their tyre. At high speeds, that obviously gets flung out through the centripetal force to the tyre, and that will create like a weight imbalance in your wheel that can sometimes cause that kind of speed wobble. And the other thing I would check is that your bike is correctly proportioned for you. You know, you say you're in the middle of the standard size range, which sounds encouraging, but stem length as a proportion of top tube length, and also it being the correct distance in front or behind of the steering axis is all important. You know, bikes are designed around a specific steering geometry for their each size. If you've changed the stem dramatically from where it was, that's going to really impact how that bike steers. And as part of the steering geometry, obviously bar width is also part of that. So if your bars are wildly too wide, that will be less of an issue. But if you've gone too small, or you've done that can impact that as well, because it will just make that handling much twitchier. I'd also just recommend you check your headsets tight. You know, we have in the past in our service centre had bikes coming in complaining of speed wobble, and it's been down to the headset bearings being essentially corroded and not working properly. So they're almost indexed, and it's something we see quite a lot. So just check that. Sounds like you've got quite frustrated. You've tried lots of different things to get rid of this neck and shoulder pain. It would appear you've tried most of the things I would suggest. One of the things we do see a lot in the studio though is people trying lots of things but not in a methodical way. Only ever change one thing at a time, see what impact that has, whether it's positive or negative. If it's negative, obviously remove it. If it's positive, leave it, then move to the next thing. What we often see is people just changing a million things all at once and not really knowing what's doing good and what's doing bad. So you might have found the solution but cancelled it out by another issue. Now, if you have been doing it in a more methodical way and you still aren't able to get rid of this neck and shoulder pain, it could be obviously that your position just isn't quite correct, and that's where I would recommend going to see a good local certified fitter. But it also could be you. And what I mean by that is it might be that actually the way you're sitting and engaging with the saddle means that you're not engaging this corset of muscles that runs around the body here. You know, this is what should be holding you up. These are for kind of steering and braking. They shouldn't really be holding you up. Obviously, at the end of a long ride, when we're all fatigued, we're all sat here like this. But, you know, at the start of your rides, at the very least, you should be engaging the core muscles to hold you up. If that's not what you're doing, then I would suggest try that. And also, if you don't feel like you can do that, then your position definitely is not correct. And it might just be that the saddle is the wrong shape for your position, or your position is just not correct for your current kind of proportional length. So problems with numb feet is one of the things that most good bike fitters see on a very regular basis. Now, it sounds like you've done kind of all the key sensible things to start with. So you've got some good custom insoles. I would, like we mentioned in a previous video, check that they fit you properly. You know, it could be that if you've been wearing them for a little while, your foot has toned up and now is no longer being supported correctly. So check that. Also, again, as we mentioned in that previous video, check that when you put your foot on top of the insole, that it doesn't spill over too much. That is often a big cause of numb feet, is that the shoes are just too narrow for you. So make sure that they're fitting you comfortably. You know, when you put these on, they should feel like a pair of trainers. Check that you're not over tightening them. You know, if the shoes are the right size for you and your insoles are still working correctly, check you're not over tightening them. And with all of that, if they're still going numb, I think the next thing I would look to is your foot. Okay, so do you have any dysfunction in the foot? Wiggle your toes. Can you lift your toes up? Can you move your toes kind of independently? If you play with the bottom of your foot, does it move, right? So the metatarsal heads in the bottom of your foot should all move independently. If they don't, then what's happened is all of the connective tissue is stiffened up, you know, a little bit like arthritis. And that's a point at which you need to then do something about that, okay? There are some things that a good bike fitter can do to help with that if you do have a functional varus or something like that, but we see that very rarely. So I would definitely check that your foot is in good health. And if in doubt, go and see a decent podiatrist.
Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Bike Fit Q&A, and you can see episode 1 about short cranks right here now. And find out more about Lee and find a good bike fitter in your area with the links down below in the description of this video. And if you have any bike fit issues you want Lee to answer in a future episode, feel free to drop a comment down below. But